Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. With Father's Day around the corner, let's talk parenting. Something that you hear a lot of times, with parenting is that there's no handbook. You just gotta bumble your way through it, do what you can, and thank you. Do what you can, and come from that place of, hey, I love you, and I'm really doing my best. And that makes a nice Pinterest post, but it's often not always as simple as that. This guy is gonna take over the show. In a system where support for parents, kids, healthcare, food, education, and anything couched under common good and decency is considered way less important than the war machine and corporate welfare, the difficulties of parenting balloon. And we, even on the left, are so often quick to throw blame at the most vulnerable members of society. 'Cause hey, it's always easier to kick down rather than up, right? But to simply look at a low-income neighborhood and tally the stats of absentee fathers and out-of-work mothers and say, ugh, these people, that displays an incredibly narrow worldview, a view that fails to take into account the systemic realities and conditions that foster poverty and all of its ills. Now, of course, there are shitty fathers who are poor. There are shitty fathers that are rich as well. There are pretty much shitty fathers all across the economic spectrum, but if a rich father, in particular a rich white father, slips up, we usually give him the benefit of the doubt. You know, it must have been a tough time on Wall Street, but if a poor black father slips up, well, that's just bound to happen, right? Because, these people. Ignoring personal and systemic prejudice is to perpetuate both, which, spoiler alert, does nothing to help the kids at the receiving end of a shitty childhood. So instead of simply casting aspersions, why not try to address the problem through support? Maybe, I don't know, through therapy and education? Well, that is precisely what Project Fatherhood does. Located in Los Angeles, Project Fatherhood seeks to, quote, re-engage low-income fathers, particularly in urban settings, in the care and upbringing of their children. I'm going to use this to my advantage. And over the course of 10 years, more than 9,000 fathers and 12,000 children have participated in the program, which continues to grow and work with more fathers and kids. And a while back, I spoke with Alan Michael Graves, the director of Project Fatherhood, about the organization's work in the LA area and their philosophy of support, education, and outreach. Take a look.
It's responsible parenting, economic stability, and healthy relationships or healthy marriage. So those three areas together are key factors as to why fathers are not involved, the lack of knowledge in those areas. And so we strengthen and enable the guys to enhance their tools in those areas in order to parent in a better way.
So obviously these are very layered issues that you're like the three things that you talked about. How do you get to the bottom of these and change what is such like a systemic problem?
Well, I think what we do different than has been done in the past, rather than coming in and saying, "Oh, we're just going to change this." We realize that men are different, and that you have to establish some trust and rapport with men first. And so our first engagement with men is not about trying to change you or trying to fix you. It's letting you tell, what's going on with you. So creating some type of trust and rapport with the gentleman, as well as letting them, for the first time, verbalize what their issues are, what trauma has affected them, what intergenerational things that have happened in their lives that have gotten them to the place that they've gotten. Far too often, people immediately engage fathers or engage men and want to fix them right away without letting them know what's wrong in the first place. And then we have groups that are what we call our specialty groups. These are groups that even when you talk about fatherhood, they're ignored. So we have a veterans group where we have a group of veterans talk about how important it is that veterans learn to be a part of their children's lives, especially after a deployment. We have a gay dads group. Those gentlemen who have adopted kids or surrogate to kids. There's been no book on this before. And so they all get together and we create a space for them to talk about issues that come up in their parenting.
How do you see the issue of raising Black and brown kids in an environment struggling with this systemic racism, both in terms of the fathers that you speak to and their engagement with their kids? Because there was an interesting article written a while back by a Black father who said that part of his job as a father was to explain what no white father has to explain, which is you need to be way more careful than your white counterparts. You can't go out at night like your white counterparts. Like, how does this systemic racism tie into your work?
You're absolutely correct. We do have to do that as well. But I think what we've tasked ourselves with, was not only educating fathers on how to have those conversations with their children, but also holding the systems that treat them in that manner accountable. So, where I would say 50% of what we do is the parenting component, excuse me, and the support and the weekly meetings that we hold with the guys. But the other half is me sitting with the Department of Family and Children's Services and saying, no, this is not correct policy on how you engage fathers. Sitting with child support, sitting with LAPD, sitting with LAUSD. Those are some very uncomfortable conversations that we have on an ongoing basis. But again, the more people are involved, the more likely they are for change. I'll give you an example. I have a 1.5-year-old, and I took him to the doctor for his annual physical. And at the end of the physical, he had an ear infection. And the doctor said, why don't you give me your wife's number so I can call her to tell her how to administer the drops in his ear? And it blew me away. I have multiple degrees, I'm highly educated, but you saw through me that you have to call my wife to tell her how to administer eardrops. And even when confronted, and I'm like, listen, doctor, I can do this. He was like, no, 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 really, I don't mind. I'll call her. And in the past, we used to get upset about things like this, but this is a systemic social change that needs to be made, because in this doctor's mind, and he's my son's pediatrician, so I know he's not overtly racist or have anything against men. In his mind, giving medication to infants is mom's job.
Speaking of, the idea of holding systems accountable and challenging the systemic idea, it seems like, that there's this paradigm that, like, Latino or minority or even poor, like a lot of poor white families, like, oh, well, the dad's not in the picture because they're just deadbeat dads. Talk a little bit about, like, just going up against that systemic paradigm for these fathers.
So we know that that's not true. I think most people know that that's not true, but what they don't know is the real reason then, if that's not true. And we know that it's because most men are not. I've never met a guy who just says, I don't want to be involved in my child's life, ever. I've been with the program 10 years. And what we know is that there are reasons and barriers why they're not involved, whether it's intergenerational violence, substance abuse, domestic violence, low self-esteem. There is a reason why this father is not involved in his child's life. And so our job is to find out, one, what that reason is. And usually it evolves around some type of trauma, and address that trauma. Treat him first, and not treat as in fix him, but give him the supplies to help make himself better. So then he then can parent. And then we work with the father and the child together through the process of reunifying and strengthening the bond between the father and the child. Seeing your friends, seeing your family members beaten up, killed, shot, hungry, poor all their life, those type of things have an effect on someone, and not want that person then to pass it on to another generation. So it may be easier for me, for a guy who's uneducated. I dropped out of school because my dad dropped out of school, because my granddad dropped out of school. I became a gangbanger because my dad was a gangbanger. To want to say, at some point, I just don't want to pass this on to my child. So it's better for me not to have anything to do with him than to be engaged with him and be a negative role model. So we work with the guys and saying that, you could be a positive role model and share your experience and share your history and share the things that have happened to you in the past, and turn that around into a positive for your child.
So one of the things that I really like and appreciate about Project Fatherhood, which you can find more about at the site below, is that they work within the system to combat the system's own shortcomings. And this isn't that argument about whether we say fuck the system or reform the system. That is a good argument to have. But this is about giving people in the system the tools that they need to survive, something that a lot of activists will skip over in our push to completely systemically change the system. Which in actuality is kind of hypocritical, because not only could we all use some guidance in the clusterfuck we all call a corporatocracy, but we all live in it together. We are part of the system, and I know that makes us all feel dirty, as it should. But indeed, the very same activists, such as myself, that are fighting to change the system, we live within the system. We are the children of this empire, lighting fires in the castles inside of our own walls.